Hi, LA Progressive friends and family. Today, Dick and I are going to share with you a conversation that we frequently get engaged in. A couple of weeks ago, Dick and I went to a conference in Northern California for an organization that we belong to called Coming to the Table. Dick, do you want to talk about what Coming to the Table is about?
Yeah, so Coming to the Table is an organization that we've participated in for, I don't know, all through the pandemic. And the idea, it brings the descendants of the enslaved together with the descendants of the enslavers. So black and white, they find out that they are joined by family roots. Um, let's point out that it's important to talk about enslaved and enslavers as opposed to masters and slaves.
Yeah.
Do you want to say why that's important?
Well, yeah. We've been together now for 20 years. And in that 20-year period, some of the things that, we have a lot of overlap in our interests and in the way we view the world. But occasionally we would have a little bit of learning opportunities. And one of those learning opportunities.
You know who did the learning in that opportunity?
Well, obviously, on matters of race, more than likely it would be you because
Right.
you were socialized to believe that you really didn't have a race.
Right.
Whiteness is just generally kind of looked at as just being human, and black is looked at as being a race. So we don't use the word master because we don't elevate people who committed crimes against humanity into this high level of almost deifying, like we do with George Washington in the United States. We do that with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and a lot of the so-called founding fathers. The vast majority of those people enslaved people. They had people in shackles and chains on their property so that the wealthy could benefit in ways that they didn't earn. Other people earned the money for the wealthy. So I'm not going to go any further than that, except to say that it is more accurate to talk about people who were enslaved because they were not slaves. That's not part of their identity. They were kidnapped and captured and held in bondage. They were enslaved by enslavers.
So right. And so a part of that, that's important in this context because a lot of the people that belong to that organization that were up in Northern California with this are very sensitive to these issues. The white people in particular, we saw, even though we've been going to these meetings, the white people in particular were really invested and overwrought to know that some descendant or some bunch of descendants of theirs had been enslavers. And I had a wonderful conversation with an older lady. I'm pretty old, but she was even older, who knew that both sides of her family were very involved in the biggest plantations in New Orleans. And she herself, at this late date, was making extensive efforts to work on reparations. So it was quite a thing to see how involved it was. But part of the deal is I've been kind of the odd man out in this group to an extent, very welcomed and part of the conversation. But I know that some of my family came here after the Civil War and were not engaged in slavery at all. On my dad's side of the family, my cousin Bobby and Sharon put together a presentation on my family, and my great grandfathers came here, and that generation came here directly from England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. My father's grandfather on his father's side was a mine supervisor in Wales, and he came and to Pennsylvania and eventually to Minnesota. So that side was clean from this enslaver taint. And on my mother's side, I know one line, the Palin line, came from, it turns out, from Belfast, Ireland, to Montreal, to Western Canada, to the Dakotas, to Minnesota, where they were well diggers and farmers and so forth. That leaves one line, the Dodd lines, my mom's line. And the family lore was that they had come over on the Mayflower. and Sharon came back from Northern California, determined to find.
Okay, wait. He's talked enough. Okay. So for anybody that's watching this and doesn't know who we are, we're Dick and Sharon. We're a husband and wife team who publishes the LA Progressive. And so we going on this to this convention. And Dick, in some respect, he's right. He comes from the kind of family where everyone in their family is welcoming to all kinds of people. There's not a shred of evidence of any kind of racism, no underlying feelings, nothing like that goes on in his family. I've been a part of his family for 20 years. But when we were in Northern California, there were so many white people who felt so bad about how their families had earned a living and in some cases had become quite wealthy. So Dick was like, oh, well, you know, I'm not with them because that didn't happen. And I said, well, you know what? There's one leg of your family that's been here on this side since the mid 1600s. And I'm going to go back home and search on Ancestry.com, where I have an account, and see if I can find an enslaver in your lineage. So I get
and this was no idle pursuit. I mean, she spent hours. She was talking about it on the plane back. She was determined to find that person. And I didn't really know. I knew something about the family coming to Massachusetts, but there was, 400 years of things could have happened I didn't know about.
So the first thing I did, I looked on the line on his mother's side, the line, the ancestral limb that had been here the longest. And the first thing that I find out is that his second great grandfather fought in the Civil War, and he lived in Illinois. He fought in the Civil War, and I was like, I'm finding it right now, but he's lived in Illinois. I was like, let's see. He fought on the Union side. Okay. He was shot. He was injured. He was hospitalized, and he died. So he died fighting on the Union side to get rid of slavery. So I said, okay, I'll give you that one.
Well, we don't really know. I mean, the brand is that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. That's not the whole motive, but we'll go over that far. At least that guy gets a free ride.
He gets a pass. And yeah. Thank you for interjecting and putting in those droplets of truth, because the truth of the matter was that Abraham Lincoln was more than willing to keep slavery if he'd do whatever to keep the Union united and not have the Confederates secede from the nation. So it really didn't initially start with slavery, but the South, the Confederates, were determined that they were going to have slavery by God, and if it meant splitting up the country, then damn well they'll go ahead and split it.
But fortunately, she's like a dog with a bone. There were other people she could find, and I was kind of sweating it because I knew on my father's side I'd found out that great uncle was a farmer in Yorkshire in England, was involved in a farmer revolt, and was transported. That was taken on a ship to what was called Van Diemen's Island, which is now Tasmania, and then went to Australia.
Right. So he knew that there was some ruffians in his past. So anyway, I looked further. And the Fairbanks line of his family tree, those are the people who came here from England in the 1600s, I think around 1633. So it just so happens that the house that was built by the Fairbanks who came to England, his great came from England to the colonies. It wasn't even the United States yet. They built a home, and that home still stands today. It's called the Fairbanks House, and it is in Massachusetts. And I'm looking at my computer because it actually has a website. And the Fairbanks family had quite a few prominent and important individuals according to the website. So I said, good, let's find out who these people were. The first person that I find is one of Dick's uncles, great uncles. His name was Charles Warren Fairbanks. Who's this guy? Who's this fella? He was vice president to Theodore Roosevelt from 1905 to 1909. Dick's great granduncle, or great, however many greats, it may be four greats.
And it gets even, they named Fairbanks, Alaska for him, but it gets even better. I mean, what about this guy that in Ohio that
so
with the boat?
Okay, so this one, I mean, I was so excited when I was finding out this information because, we're married. My husband. And I was joking with him about, I'm going to find, some enslavers in your past, basically, so that I could get him to give me some reparations so that he would have to do all the housework.
As if I don't give her daily reparations. Who just went grocery shopping?
Do all the housework. So anyway, so then I find out about this man named Reverend Calvin Fairbanks. He was also one of Dick's uncles, and he was an active abolitionist in the years leading up to the Civil War. He freed 47 slaves from the states of Virginia and Kentucky. What happened was he met a woman who escaped from slavery, and she told him about her experience. So she was there was a speaking circuit where abolitionists would have people who escaped through the Underground Railroad come and tell other people that they were hoping to convert into abolitionists. And when he heard her story, he actually went and got his own boat and went down, I guess, down the Mississippi, the Ohio River, and started to free slaves himself. And he ended up freeing 47 slaves. But he was arrested. He was caught. He was arrested. He was whipped. He had to take the lash, just the same way slaves did. And he served 17 years in prison for being an abolitionist.
Right. But I know that my family is hard-headed. So when he got out of prison after 17 years, he went right back to it.
He went right back to it and got arrested a second time.
Yeah.
So obviously he did this before 1865. So I was just so blown away and so excited to find out about the vice president, about Reverend Calvin Fairbanks, who lived from 1816 to 1898, about his second great grandfather who fought in the Union War. So Dick has been given a reprieve. Just want
right, but
the moral of the story is,
well, but part of it is too. So the family lore was wrong. The Fairbanks, John Fairbanks, didn't come over on the Mayflower. He came over like a dozen years later and built this Fairbanks house, which is in Dedham, Massachusetts, still standing. It's the oldest timber frame house in America, still standing, and it stayed in the Fairbanks house in family for 268 years until the beginning of the 20th century, when for economic reasons it had to be sold. So that was pretty dramatic. And so what this really is, this is kind of, marriages have these funny stories. So you should have seen her when we came back. I mean, she was on that computer looking and searching, determined to find a guy, and everything she found just elevated me a little bit. So it's kind of a family story. But the bottom line with it really is that it may be true. Now, she'll keep looking, and it may be true that no relative of mine was ever an enslaver, ever involved in the slave trade at all. Could have been. They all lived in the North, Minnesota and Illinois and so forth. But like all white people, even all white people who came after the Civil War, my family and me today and all through our heritage benefited from 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, discrimination, police violence that continues to this day. I mean, we're now in a period, this whole anti-woke campaign is not a dog whistle. It's a bullhorn for racism. It says, Black people, know your place, and your place isn't in the room, it's outside someplace. So I know, so maybe no part of my family was part of the slavery business, but I know I benefited, and I know Sharon's family paid the price all these years.
That's right. That's right. So even though half of my family came from my heritage is African American, and the other half of my family is West Indian American from the Caribbean. I also have white. One leg of my tree is white, but slavery played a role in shaping me, my family, and this entire country. So as much as Dick and I like to joke, and we do joke, because the work that we do at times can be very depressing. And it's really important to laugh and to smile. But it's also important to understand that slavery shaped this country. And but I'm also grateful that even during the hardest of times, slaves had allies. People enslaved had allies helping them, abolitionists that were Black and white. And I'm happy that my husband's ancestors were like serious abolitionists.
So the next thing we're going to do, so I said earlier that on my dad's side of the family, the Price side, Sharon and my cousin Bobby, who's the oldest cousin among us, are both Ancestry.com to the max. They did this wonderful presentation to my family, my Price family, of detailing all the details, Van Diemen's Island and so forth. Now what we're going to do is create the similar kind of, because she did all this research, she knows me back to France, right?
Yes.
We're going to put a presentation for my Palin or my mom's side of the family.
Well, thanks, LA Progressive, for paying attention to what goes on in the Dick and Sharon household. And we'll catch up with you again next time. So long.
Thanks, everybody.